Welcome back, dear friends, to Family Shadows, a place where stories of fathers, children, and the quiet lessons of family come alive. If this is your first time here, I invite you to subscribe and stay with us, because every week we tell a story that might feel close to your own heart or the heart of someone you know. Today's story is called, "My Daughter Used My Credit Card for Family Dinner, but Left Me Out." The next day. Now, let us begin. John Harris was 62 years old and knew the rhythms of solitude. The creak of the porch swing in the morning, the hiss of the kettle at dawn, the quiet shuffle of slippers across hardwood floors that had long ago carried the quick footsteps of a child running late for school. He was a widower. His wife, Mary, had passed 8 years before. Since then, he had carried the role of both anchor and ghost in his own home, always present, rarely noticed. His daughter Lisa was 34 now, married to a man named Mark. They lived only 20 minutes away, but sometimes it felt like a continent. John never expected luxury in old age. He only wanted respect, and maybe once in a while to be remembered. It was a Tuesday evening when John's phone buzzed. A message lit up on the screen. Lisa's name. His heart lifted. She rarely texted without a request. "Thanks, Dad. Dinner was great. Everyone loved it." He read it twice. Dinner. He hadn't had dinner with them. He hadn't even been invited. Confused, he checked his wallet. His credit card was missing. It wasn't unusual for Lisa to borrow it. She had done it a few times before, usually with a quick call. "Dad, can I use your card for gas? I'll return it tomorrow." He always said yes. But this time, no call. Just a text afterward, as if he had been there, as if he had paid willingly for a night he never shared. That night, John made himself a sandwich. White bread, a slice of ham, some mustard. He sat at the oak dining table that once held family Thanksgivings, Christmas dinners, and birthdays where balloons hung from the chandelier. He pulled out the extra chair, the one where Lisa used to sit when she was 12, her hair still in braids, her laughter spilling into the room like sunlight. Now, the chair was empty. He stared at it while chewing his sandwich, a lump rising in his throat, not from the food but from memory. John walked into the living room and sat beside Mary's framed photograph. He spoke softly, as he often did when the loneliness pressed too hard. "Mary," he whispered, "they had a family dinner tonight. Our Lisa, her husband, the kids. She used my card to pay for it, and I wasn't there." Her smile in the picture was frozen in time, tender, knowing. He imagined what she might say. "John, don't let it break you. She's lost in her own world. One day she'll remember." But memory did not buy respect, and respect, John realized, had quietly slipped out the back door of his family. The next morning, while trimming the rose bushes, John's neighbor, Mrs. Clark, leaned over the fence. She was a sprightly woman in her 70s, always quick with gossip. "John, I saw Lisa and her family last night," she chirped. "They were at Bella's steakhouse. Looked like quite a party, everyone dressed up, kids laughing, Mark ordering wine." John froze. Bella's Steakhouse was the most expensive restaurant in town. He had taken Mary there once for their 25th anniversary. The bill had nearly given him a heart attack back then. Now his daughter had charged it to his card. A feast he could almost see but never taste. That evening, John sat in his recliner, the house dark except for the glow of the TV. But he wasn't watching. His mind replayed the image Mrs. Clark had painted, Lisa smiling, the kids clinking glasses of soda, Mark's hand waving for another bottle of Cabernet. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about being excluded, about being erased. There was a saying John remembered from his youth. The man who pays should always have a seat at the table. He chuckled bitterly. He had paid, yes, but his seat remained empty. Sleep did not come easily. John tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling where shadows stretched like memories he couldn't chase away. At 3 a.m., he rose and wandered into the kitchen. He made tea the way Mary used to, 1 spoon of honey, no sugar. He sat at the table again, the same empty chair mocking him from across. "I don't mind being old," he said aloud, voice trembling, "but I do mind being invisible." The kettle's quiet drip was his only answer. By dawn, John had decided on one thing: he would not confront Lisa in anger. He had never raised his voice at her, not even when she skipped curfew as a teenager, or when she announced she was marrying Mark after only 6 months of dating. But he also knew silence was no longer protection. It was permission, and permission was something he could no longer afford to give. So, the next day, John put on his best jacket, the navy one with frayed cuffs. He slipped the photograph of Mary into the inside pocket. He looked in the mirror and said, "Today I will not be invisible." John left the house with steady steps, heading toward the bank first. He wanted proof. He wanted the bill in his hands, not just for the money, but for the truth it carried. As the door closed behind him, the house fell silent again. But this time, silence was not surrender, it was preparation. The printout from the bank weighed heavier in John's pocket than the paper should allow. He had gone early before the morning rush, standing in line with retirees cashing Social Security checks and young mothers depositing small envelopes. When the teller handed him the receipt, his eyes scanned the line. Bella's Steakhouse, $486.73. He folded the paper neatly, slid it into his jacket, and walked home in silence. At the kitchen table, he laid the printout down and stared at it. The ink was fresh, the numbers exact. No one could argue with them, but what gnawed at him wasn't the figure. It was the knowledge of what that money had bought, laughter that excluded him, warmth from which he'd been shut out. The chair across from him stood empty again. That was the cruelest sight of all. He remembered dinners from long ago, when Lisa was small and Mary alive. The same chair used to hold Lisa's skinny frame, her knees knocking under the table, her fork pushing peas into mashed potatoes. "Eat your vegetables," Mary would laugh, and John would join in, pretending sternness. Now, all these years later, the chair was still there, but the child who once filled it had grown into a woman who forgot the man who gave her that chair to begin with. John rubbed his temples. He was not a man given to anger, not outwardly. But hurt has a way of fermenting into something sharper when left too long. That evening he tried calling Lisa. She didn't pick up. A few hours later she sent a quick message. "Sorry, Dad, crazy busy with work, talk later." The words were sterile, like a form letter. John stared at the glowing screen, thumb hovering over the keys. He wanted to write back, busy, not too busy for a steakhouse dinner. But he didn't. He put the phone down, the silence in the room expanding around him. 2 days passed. The air grew colder, September hinting at autumn. John busied himself with chores, fixing a loose hinge, raking early leaves, tightening a leaking faucet. Tasks filled the hours, but not the hollowness. On the third evening, Mrs. Clark appeared again at the fence. She carried a basket of muffins, still warm, and insisted he take them. "I tell you, John, that family of yours looked mighty cheerful the other night," she said between sips of lemonade. Lisa looked radiant. "Those kids of hers, your grandkids, they're growing so fast. You must be proud." John forced a smile, accepted the muffins, and nodded, but inside the words pricked like nettles. Proud. Yes, he was proud, but pride mixed with neglect became bitterness, and he could feel it brewing. Later that night he set the muffins on the counter untouched. He sat down at the table with Mary's photograph again. The empty chair stared at him, an uninvited guest. "Do you see this, Mary?" he whispered. "Our little girl doesn't think of me anymore. She thinks of convenience. A credit card is easier to love than a father." The words trembled out, half confession, half lament. He pressed his fingers to his eyes, feeling the sting of tears he hadn't allowed in years. Saturday came. John decided he would not wait any longer. Family was slipping through his fingers like sand, and he would not let the hourglass run out without at least trying to hold on. He drove to Lisa's house, the car rattling slightly as it always did over the old bridge. The Evans home was bright and busy, 2 cars in the driveway, toys scattered across the lawn. Through the window he saw shadows moving, the television flickering. When Lisa opened the door, surprise flashed across her face. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Her tone was cordial, but John could hear the undercurrent, unexpected, perhaps unwelcome. "I was in the neighborhood," he lied. "Thought I'd stop by." The children came running, small arms around his legs, laughter bubbling. For a moment, warmth returned. He ruffled their hair, his heart softening. But then Mark appeared in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. "John," he said, using his first name instead of Dad, a habit that always grated. Inside, the dining table was set for 4, plates, silverware, glasses, no 5th place. John's eyes lingered on the arrangement. The children's voices faded into the background. His own breath seemed to echo. There it was again, the empty seat. Not in his house this time, but in theirs. His absence planned, measured, normalized. Lisa caught his glance and flushed slightly. "Oh, we weren't expecting company tonight," she murmured. John nodded slowly, swallowing hard. He had no wish to embarrass her, not in front of her children, not in front of Mark. So he smiled faintly, touched each child's shoulder, and excused himself after only 10 minutes. The drive home was long, headlights stretching the road like accusations. When he finally sat back at his own table, John pulled the bank slip from his jacket again. He placed it in front of him, right in the middle of the oak wood. Numbers did not lie, but it wasn't numbers he was after anymore. It was dignity. And as the night deepened, John Harris knew that the next time he sat at a table with his daughter, it would not be as the forgotten man who paid silently in the background. It would be as a father who demanded, gently but firmly, his rightful place. Sunday morning arrived with a cool breeze sneaking through the curtains. John sat at the table again, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. The bank slip still rested on the wood where he had left it, a silent witness to the days that had passed. He thought of the visit to Lisa's house, the 4 plates neatly set, his presence treated like an afterthought. The image played in his mind as relentlessly as a scratched record. Yet when his phone buzzed with another message from Lisa, his hand trembled not with anger but with the weight of choice. "Thanks again for helping out, Dad. It means a lot." That was all. No mention of the dinner, no apology, no recognition that he had stood in her doorway like a stranger at his own family's table. Just a sentence, polite and hollow, like a receipt handed over after a purchase. John placed the phone down without replying. Silence, he decided, would speak louder than any words he could offer. In his youth, John had believed silence was strength. He had grown up in a time when fathers showed their love through labor, not speeches. His own father had rarely said, "I love you," but John had known it in the way he worked 2 jobs, in the way his hands were always calloused but never empty when it came to providing. So John, too, had built his life in silence. fixing cars, mowing lawns, paying bills, keeping the world turning smoothly for Mary and Lisa. Words were fewer, gestures greater. But now he wondered if that same silence had raised a daughter who thought of her father as background noise, steady, dependable, but ignorable. That night, John prepared a small dinner for himself. A baked potato, some leftover roast chicken, green beans. He set the table carefully out of habit, plate, fork, knife, napkin folded neatly. He poured a glass of water, sat down, and stared across at the chair opposite him. Empty again. He remembered the last time Lisa had sat there, months ago, maybe longer. She had been scrolling through her phone, barely looking up between bites. He had tried to tell her about the new birdhouse he built for the backyard, but her responses had been distracted. That's nice, Dad. It wasn't cruelty, just indifference. Yet sometimes indifference cut deeper than cruelty ever could. The phone rang halfway through his meal. For a moment, hope flickered. It might be Lisa, maybe even the grandchildren, but the caller ID showed a telemarketer. John let it ring. He finished his dinner slowly, each bite heavy with thought. He had words inside him, words that wanted to be spoken, but every time he imagined calling Lisa, the words shrank back. What if she dismissed him again? What if she sighed, said she was busy, told him he was overreacting? So he stayed silent. And in that silence, the weight of his invisibility grew. The following week stretched long. John filled his days with small tasks, polishing the old photo frames, sweeping the porch, feeding the stray cat that sometimes wandered into his yard. He went to the grocery store and exchanged polite nods with the cashier, but no real conversation. In the evenings, he sat with Mary's photo. It had become a ritual, almost a prayer. "Do you think I was too quiet, Mary?" he asked one night, voice breaking. "Do you think I should have told her more, about how much we sacrificed, about what love really looks like? Maybe she thinks money just appears. Maybe she thinks fathers don't need to be thanked." The photograph, as always, gave no reply. Yet in the silence, John found both comfort and ache. On Thursday, Lisa stopped by unannounced. She carried a bag of clothes for the children and breezed in as if the house still belonged to her. "Hi, Dad," she said quickly, setting the bag on the couch. "Sorry, can't stay long, just dropping these off to wash. Our machine's acting up again." John nodded, his heart swelling with things he wanted to say. "Lisa, sit with me. Share a meal. Tell me about your life. Ask me about mine." But the words never made it past his lips. He only smiled faintly, took the bag, and watched as she hurried out again, already on her phone. When the door clicked shut, the silence roared louder than ever. That night he walked out into the backyard, the cool air biting at his cheeks. The stars hung low and bright. He thought of the countless nights he had stood out here with Mary, dreaming about Lisa's future, praying she would grow into someone kind, someone who remembered where she came from. Now, standing alone, he realized kindness could vanish when convenience took its place. But even as the ache swelled, John held onto his silence. Not because he was weak, but because he was gathering. Gathering patience, gathering proof, gathering the quiet strength that would one day demand to be heard. He folded the bank slip once more, tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket, and whispered to the night, "I'll speak when the time is right. Until then, let silence do the teaching." Saturday morning was crisp, the kind of early autumn air that made the world smell of leaves and wood smoke. John was on his knees in the yard, trimming the rose bushes Mary had once planted along the fence. Their blooms were fewer now, but he tended them carefully, as if keeping them alive meant keeping a piece of her close. The rasp of his clippers was interrupted by a cheerful voice. "Morning, John." It was Mrs. Clark, leaning over the fence with the energy of a woman who never seemed her age. She wore a wide sun hat and carried a basket of laundry on her hip. "Morning," John replied, wiping his hands on his jeans. She lowered her voice conspiratorially, as she often did when delivering news. "I saw Lisa and her family the other night, out at Bella's steakhouse. Oh, they looked marvelous. Lisa in a blue dress, Mark ordering that fancy wine. The children were laughing so loud the whole place seemed brighter. I thought to myself, now that's a family night to remember." John's hand stilled on the clippers. The words hit him harder than he expected, though he already knew about the dinner from the charge on his card. But hearing it described in detail, the laughter, the dress, the glow of it all was like reopening a wound still raw. Mrs. Clark noticed the pause and frowned. "You weren't there, John." He forced a smile, the kind that hides pain under politeness. No, I wasn't." "Well," she continued, unaware of the sting, "they sure seem to be having a wonderful time. You must be proud of them." Proud, the word lodged in his chest. He nodded, said nothing more, and bent back to his roses. She walked away, humming, and the yard fell silent again. The clippers slipped in his hands. He caught himself before they cut his palm, but the near miss startled him. He stared at the roses, beautiful, fragile, sharp with thorns. How fitting, he thought, beauty that could wound. He straightened slowly, joints aching, and looked toward Lisa's house beyond the trees. He imagined her laughing at the steakhouse, Mark's glass raised high, the children wide-eyed at the desserts. A perfect picture except for the missing piece. Him. That evening, John sat again at the oak table, the bank slip unfolded before him like a silent accuser. The numbers seemed colder now, illuminated by Mrs. Clark's words, not just money but a ledger of betrayal. He spoke into the quiet, his voice low. "Mary, do you see? They laughed, they celebrated, and all I got was the bill." The photo of her on the sideboard seemed to watch him, her smile eternal, her eyes gentle. He closed his own, remembering her laughter, her belief that families were bound by gratitude. She'd be so ashamed, he thought, to see our daughter forgetting the very man who raised her. On Sunday morning, he went for a walk downtown, hoping movement might ease the heaviness in his chest. He passed the coffee shop where he and Mary had once lingered on Saturday mornings, sharing a muffin between them. He passed the bookstore where he had bought Lisa her first novels, the library where she had studied for exams. Every corner seemed to echo with memories of a time when his presence had mattered. He stopped in front of Bella's steakhouse. The polished windows reflected his older face, lined and weary. He could almost hear Lisa's laughter spilling through the glass, Mark's booming voice ordering wine. He pressed his hand briefly against the cool pane, then turned away. Inside, families were gathering again. Outside, he walked alone. That night the phone buzzed with another message. Lisa again. "Hey Dad, can you watch the kids Wednesday evening? Mark and I have an event." John stared at the words. No mention of the dinner. No thanks for his constant help. Just another request, delivered as if his time and presence were guaranteed. He didn't reply. Instead, he folded the bank slip, tucked it carefully into his wallet, and sat in the armchair with Mary's photo on the table beside him. Silence once more, but this time, silence with a plan forming inside it. He knew now that he couldn't keep pretending nothing was wrong. Mrs. Clark's words had confirmed what he already feared. He was no longer seen as part of the family circle, just a resource orbiting it. And a resource can be drained, but a father could stand. He would wait, he would choose his moment, and when it came, he would speak in a way that could not be ignored. The sun crept through the blinds in thin, golden lines. John rose earlier than usual, his body still heavy from a restless night, yet his mind clear with a sense of purpose. For days, silence had been his only companion, but silence, he realized, had limits. It could protect dignity for a time, but it could not restore it. He showered, shaved carefully, and reached for the navy jacket that Mary once said made him look distinguished. The fabric was worn at the cuffs, but it still held a quiet authority. He slipped the folded bank slip into the inside pocket along with Mary's photograph. He wanted her close when the moment came. The bank was busier than before, a line of people weaving between velvet ropes. John waited patiently, eyes fixed on the tiled floor. When his turn came, he asked the teller for a full printed statement of recent transactions. She clicked at her keyboard, printed the pages, and handed them over with a smile. He scanned the list slowly, line by line. The steakhouse charge stood out like ink spilled on white cloth. Around it were smaller charges, groceries, gas, utilities, his modest life documented in numbers. And then, glaring in the middle, nearly $500 for a night of celebration he had never seen. John folded the papers, thanked the teller, and walked back out into the cool morning air. The weight in his pocket was heavier now, but this time it steadied him. Back home, he spread the papers across the oak table, smoothing them with careful hands. He imagined Lisa sitting across from him, her eyes darting away, her voice filled with excuses. He imagined Mark smirking, brushing it off as if money grew on trees. The thought tightened something inside him. He wasn't angry in the way younger men get angry, with shouting, with fists, with slammed doors. His anger was quieter, colder, like water freezing slowly in a pipe until it bursts. Mary's photograph looked down from the sideboard, her smile soft but resolute. "It's time," he murmured. "Time to stop being invisible." That afternoon he made a decision. He called Lisa. His voice was calm, measured. "Lisa, I'd like to take you and Mark to lunch tomorrow. Just the three of us, I'll pay." There was a pause on the other end, then Lisa laughed lightly. "Of course, Dad, that sounds nice. Where?" John named a small cafe downtown, one Mary had loved. It wasn't expensive, but it was quiet, intimate, impossible to drown a conversation in noise. Lisa agreed quickly, and they set the time. When John hung up, he sat back in the chair, breathing deeply. His hands trembled slightly, but not from fear, from anticipation. The next day arrived brisk and clear. John walked to the cafe, papers tucked neatly into his jacket. He chose a table near the window, where the light pooled in soft gold. He ordered a coffee and waited. Minutes later, Lisa and Mark arrived. Lisa kissed his cheek lightly, distracted already by a message on her phone. Mark clapped him on the shoulder, his cologne sharp in the air. "Good to see you, John," Mark said, sliding into the seat opposite. They ordered quickly, sandwiches, salads, coffee. Small talk began. The children's school, Mark's latest project at work, Lisa's endless schedule. John nodded, listening quietly, but his hand rested lightly on the folded papers in his pocket. When the food arrived, he let the chatter continue for a while. He wanted them comfortable, unaware. He buttered his bread, sipped his coffee, studied their faces. Lisa, so much like Mary in her youth, bright, determined, but harder now. Mark, confident, almost careless. Finally, John set his fork down. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the papers, laying them carefully on the table between them. Lisa blinked. "Dad, what's this?" John's voice was steady. "The bill from Bella's Steakhouse, $486, paid with my card. Thank you for letting me cover your family dinner. I only wish I'd been invited." The cafe fell silent around their table. Lisa's eyes widened, color draining from her face. Mark shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. John leaned back slightly, his gaze calm but unyielding. I've spent my life giving quietly, without complaint. But when giving turns into being forgotten, that's not family, that's something else. The words hung in the air like smoke. Lisa opened her mouth, closed it again. Mark reached for his coffee, but his hand shook. For once, neither of them had an easy reply. John didn't push. He didn't raise his voice. He simply let the silence do what it had been preparing for all along, force the truth into the open. And as the light from the window fell across his weathered face, John knew this was only the beginning. The air in the cafe was still. Outside, people walked briskly down the sidewalk carrying shopping bags, holding lattes, laughing with friends. Life moved as usual, but at John's table time had slowed into a heavy silence. Lisa stared at the papers spread before her as though they might vanish if she looked away. Mark leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight, eyes darting around as if searching for a way out of the moment. John did not rush. He lifted his coffee cup slowly, took a sip, and set it back down. His hands, though aged and lined, were steady. He had built homes with those hands, paid bills with them, held Mary's hand through sickness with them. Now those same hands rested calmly on the evidence of his exclusion. Finally, Lisa spoke. "Dad, I should have told you. We didn't mean." John raised a hand, gentle but firm, and her words faded. "Lisa," he said softly, "this isn't about the money." Her eyes glistened, a hint of tears rising. Mark shifted, his voice low but defensive. "John, it was just a dinner. Don't make it bigger than it is." John's gaze met his, unwavering. A dinner is never just a dinner. A table is where families remember they belong to each other. You set 4 places that night and you left the 5th empty. Except it wasn't empty, it was paid for. Paid for by the man you didn't bother to invite. Mark's lips pressed into a thin line. Lisa reached out as if to touch her father's hand, but he folded his fingers together, holding himself still. John leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping into the quiet gravity that had once made Lisa listen when she was a child. "Do you know what it feels like, Lisa? To sit alone at a table, imagining the laughter of your family somewhere else, while your name is the one printed on the bill. It feels like being erased. It feels like the years I spent providing, guiding, loving were worth less than a signature on a card." Tears spilled down Lisa's cheeks now, and she whispered, "Dad, I didn't think." "That's the problem," John interrupted, his tone calm but sharp as glass. "You didn't think. You didn't remember. You didn't see me." He reached into his jacket once more and pulled out Mary's photograph, setting it beside the bank slip. The picture showed her in younger days, smiling, eyes full of light. "Your mother would never have allowed this. She believed a family's strength was in gratitude, not in taking one another for granted. She taught you that, Lisa. Did you forget?" The sight of Mary's face on the table deepened the silence. Lisa covered her mouth with her hand, shoulders trembling. Mark exhaled, long and uneasy, but still said nothing. John's voice softened, but the firmness remained. "I'm not angry the way you think. I'm not here to shout. I'm here to remind you that I am not invisible. I will not be treated as a wallet with no face, a chair you can choose to leave empty. I am your father, and as long as I live, I deserve respect." He gathered the papers, folded them neatly, and slipped them back into his jacket. He left Mary's photograph on the table a moment longer, letting his daughter's eyes linger on it before returning it to his pocket as well. Then, leaning back in his chair, he delivered the words that would echo in their hearts long after the plates were cleared. Family is not built on money. Family is built on presence. If you can't see that, then the next time you sit down to a family dinner, you'll find my chair empty by choice, not by your forgetting." Lisa broke into sobs, covering her face with her hands. Mark sat stiffly, caught between pride and guilt, unable to meet John's gaze. John rose slowly, steady despite the years that bowed his shoulders. He placed a $20 bill on the table for his coffee, nodded once to them both, and walked out into the sunlight. The door closed behind him, but the weight of his words remained, heavy as stone. For the first time in a long time, John felt taller. He had spoken, he had stood, and now the burden was no longer his alone to carry. The walk home from the cafe was long, but John did not feel weary. The autumn air was cool on his face, and for the first time in years his steps carried a weight not of burden but of resolve. He had said what needed to be said. The silence he had carried like a shroud had finally broken, and in its place stood clarity. When he reached his house, he sat at the oak table again, laying Mary's photograph gently before him. "I did it," he whispered. "I told her, I told them both." The picture, with its unchanging smile, seemed to nod in approval, but John knew words alone were not enough. Respect demanded not only voice but action, and so he considered carefully, quietly, as he always did, the next step. The following week, John went to the bank once more. This time, his request was different. He asked to open a new account, one in his name and in the names of his grandchildren, set aside solely for their future. The clerk helped him sign the papers, explaining the details, the benefits, the restrictions. When it was done, John transferred a substantial portion of his savings into the account. Not all of it. He kept enough for his modest life, his groceries, his bills, but enough that the children would one day know their grandfather had thought of them, had protected them even when others had failed to see him. The money was not for Lisa or Mark, not to be spent on steak dinners or fleeting luxuries. It was a seed planted for the next generation, a legacy built not on resentment but on love. John left the bank lighter, as though a stone had been lifted from his chest. Days later, Lisa called. Her voice was softer than usual, cautious. "Dad, about the other day, I've been thinking about what you said. I'm sorry." John listened, his silence not cold this time but patient. He let her stumble through her words, let her tears falter into the phone. Finally, he spoke. "I'm glad you're thinking, Lisa. That's all I've ever wanted, for you to see me, not just my card." She sniffled. "The kids miss you. They keep asking when you'll come by." "I'll see them soon," he said gently. "They are the reason I keep standing." On Sunday, John invited Lisa, Mark, and the children to his house. The oak table was set carefully, plates and silver polished, the air filled with the smell of roasted chicken and apple pie. When everyone sat down, John cleared his throat. He pulled a thin envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it in front of Lisa. She frowned. "Dad, what's this?" "Something I want you to understand," John said. Lisa opened the envelope and pulled out the bank documents. Her eyes widened as she read the names, hers, Mark's, and beneath them the names of her children. "It's a savings account," John explained, his voice steady. "For the kids, for their future. The money is locked for them alone. You and Mark can't touch it. It's theirs, and only theirs when the time is right." Mark leaned forward, stunned. "John, why?" "Because love isn't measured in what you take," John interrupted firmly. "It's measured in what you protect. You forgot that when you left me out of your dinner. I want my grandchildren to grow up knowing their grandfather saw them, valued them, and would not let them be forgotten. Even if I was." The room fell silent. The children fidgeted in their chairs, too young to understand. Lisa's eyes filled again, her face pale with shame. Mark exhaled slowly, unable to find a defense. John reached for Mary's photograph at the end of the table, holding it up briefly. "Your mother taught me that respect isn't given once. It's practiced every day at every table. I couldn't let her memory live in a family that treats me like a stranger." He set the photo down and folded his hands. "This account is my way of making sure her lesson survives, through the kids, through time." Lisa covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. "Dad, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," John replied softly. "You only need to remember, every time you sit at a table, remember the chair you leave empty, because one day it may never be filled again." The meal continued in heavy quiet, broken only by the clatter of forks and the chatter of children who sensed none of the storm swirling around them. But John felt peace for the first time in weeks. He had stood, he had acted, and he had shifted the story of his family. Whether Lisa and Mark truly changed, he could not know. But his grandchildren would one day understand, and that was enough. The evening sun spilled golden light across John's dining room, washing the oak table in a warmth it hadn't felt in years. The roasted chicken was carved down to its bones, the apple pie half-eaten, crumbs scattered across the plates. The children giggled as they chased one another around the living room, their joy unclouded by the tension that still lingered between the adults. Lisa sat quietly, her fork untouched, eyes red from crying. Mark stared at his hands, uncharacteristically silent, the confidence drained from his posture. John leaned back in his chair, hands folded, gaze steady. He wasn't gloating, wasn't savoring their discomfort. He was simply present. Fully present for the first time in a long time, not as a man forgotten, but as a father whose place could no longer be denied. Lisa finally broke the silence. "Dad, I don't know how I let it get this far. You've given me everything, and I treated you like you were just there, always there, like you'd never go away." Her voice cracked and she reached for his hand. This time, John let her hold it. Her fingers were warm, trembling, the grip of a daughter who suddenly remembered the strength of the man who had raised her. "Dad," she whispered, "I'm sorry." John squeezed gently. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of years. "Lisa, apologies matter, but what matters more is change. Family isn't proven in the easy days. It's proven in whether you see each other in the hard ones. I don't need fancy dinners or grand words. I only need a chair at the table and the respect that comes with it." Mark cleared his throat, his voice low. "John, you're right. I didn't treat you fairly. I let my pride get in the way. I'll do better." John studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "For the children's sake, I hope you mean that. They're watching us, learning from us. If they see their parents dismiss their grandfather, what lesson will they carry into their own lives?" The weight of his words filled the room. Lisa lowered her head and Mark exhaled deeply, as if the truth had finally settled into him. The children came running back, breathless and laughing, their cheeks flushed. "Grandpa, Grandpa, can we have dessert now?" John smiled, rising slowly. He cut the remaining pie into slices and placed them before the children. Their eyes lit up, their small hands clutching forks eagerly. In that moment, John felt something stir inside him, not triumph, not vindication, but peace. He had spoken, he had acted, and now he saw before him the true future of his family, not Lisa or Mark, with their flaws and blind spots, but the children, whose laughter filled the house with the same light Mary once brought. As the evening drew to a close, Lisa helped clear the table. She lingered near John, her voice soft. "Dad, next week we're planning another dinner, at our place. Will you come, please?" John looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "If there's a chair for me, Lisa, I'll be there." Her tears returned, but this time they carried hope. When the house grew quiet again after Lisa and her family left, John stood at the doorway watching the taillights fade down the street. He returned to the table, sat down, and placed Mary's photograph before him. "Well, Mary," he whispered, "we did it. I reminded them what family means. Not through shouting, not through anger, but through standing tall when it mattered. Maybe now they'll remember. Maybe now they'll see." The photograph, unchanged, seemed to glow faintly in the lamplight, her smile eternal. John leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the silence embrace him. Not the silence of being invisible, but the silence of peace. For the first time in a long while, the empty chair at the table no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a promise that family, real family, could be restored when truth was spoken and respect reclaimed. Thank you, dear friends, for staying with us through this story on Family Shadows. We hope it touched your heart as much as it touched ours in telling it. Family is not about money, nor about convenience. It is about presence, respect, and love that endures. We invite you to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, so you won't miss the next story. Until then, may you and your loved ones always find strength in each other. From all of us at Family Shadows, thank you for listening, and may you have health, peace, and happiness in your family.